this is Stephanie.
And this is Brian.
Welcome to Season 7 of the making and the remaking of A Codependent Mind.
We're going to be moving back to a format that we did in the first 4 seasons of the podcast, the more one-on-one conversational style.
If you're wondering what happened to Season 6, that was the reading of the audiobook. And since we completed that, we took most of it down. There's still that one episode where we reflect on the writing of the audiobook. But the audiobook is still available for purchase on Amazon, on Spotify, and other platforms.
So this is going to kind of pick up where we left off with Season 4.
Before we did the guests.
Before we did the guests and then before we wrote and released the book.
Right. And it's really, as you said, kind of an extension of Season 4, particularly because we're going to be talking about relationships, which was the theme of Season 4. And obviously, we didn't exhaust all the possible topics.
Yeah, there's kind of an endless amount of things we can talk about with relationships.
And particularly, we wanted to go back to that theme because we hear from a lot of people who have struggled with codependency or have codependency habits, and they don't really have experience with what we would call healthy or successful relationships.
Yeah, so this is almost like the aftermath of the codependency in that, for me, even after I started to recognize all these things and work through them, I still had no experience with what a healthy relationship looked like, which goes well beyond the scope of codependency. But we're still going to think about it from that lens. From
the lens of codependency and really anyone else who has had relational trauma, which has resulted in disordered interpersonal relationships. We heard about this challenge. You're just speaking that you had it kind of, even once you emerge from the codependent habits, it's kind of, what do I do now? Yeah. I don't have any experience with a successful or healthy relationship. And we heard about that from our guests as well. Is if your only experience really from childhood is this certain way of interacting with people and a certain way of being in, especially being in intimate relationships. You have this kind of distorted sense of, I guess, what's normal, for lack of a better phrase.
There's a lot of other habits I had besides just codependent habits, just habits of not exploring curiosity in other people. And there was a lot of different habits that all kind of interrelate in some ways to my experience. But then also I lacked a lot of habits too that make it useful to pick up when it comes to having a strong relationship.
So we did some of that in Season 4. I think, kind of talk about, and all the way through the podcast, here's kind of what we might see as the healthy versions of these behaviors. And here's what happens when those behaviors become distorted. But we're going to be a little more explicit in this season in terms of talking about things that we think are helpful in creating a healthy, strong, loving, sustainable relationship. So almost kind of outlining a relationship toolkit.
And so we'll be going to all the things that we have in our toolkit that we've been using when finding successful.
Exactly. So it's going to be maybe a little more how-to this season, although neither of us are particularly good at that. I think both of us kind of more like the philosophical discussions about relationships.
Yeah, there'll still be plenty of here's where it went wrong for us in the past kind of stuff too, because that I think what kind of makes our podcast useful for a lot of people.
And obviously, if you have a certain aspect of relationships that you're interested in hearing from us about, please let us know. codependentmind@gmail.com or go to the website codependentmind.com. But we're gonna start this toolkit season, I guess we'll call it, with kind of an interesting tool, and that's the lean startup methodology.
Yeah, this whole thing was super foreign to me, and I heard it from you first, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah, and it may not be immediately obvious how this relates to relationships, so you'll have to stay with us for just a little bit. And I just happened in one of my jobs to end up, I'm not an entrepreneur by profession or maybe even orientation, but I just happened in one of my many jobs to end up teaching a class on the lean startup methodology. And I found it a kind of really powerful tool, not just to create new businesses or startups, but also to examine how I operate in my everyday life and in my relationships. So I'll just say the lean startup methodology was designed to rapidly and leanly, it's not an acronym, it's just, I guess most mean that this is a lean method, you pare it down, rapidly create products or set up new businesses. So the way that maybe that was done traditionally, so you think of, say, a traditional business plan. You have an idea for a product and you write this big business plan, which is this super long document that outlines every detail that could contribute to the success or the failure of the business. And then maybe you take that business plan, you shop it around, you get a loan, you get some investment, you spend the 3 to 5 years setting up this business. So the lean methodology is designed to short circuit that. That's the right way to put it. Instead of a business plan, you're still starting with an idea for a product or service. And you just sketch out very briefly who your customers are, what value you are providing for them, and how you would deliver that value. And what I think is the most powerful idea about that methodology is that all of those things, who your customers are, what value you're providing them, how you would deliver that value, all of those things are just a collection of hypotheses.
Yeah, so you just have an idea of what you think you're doing and how you think it'll be used, and you don't really know if that's how it's going to turn out or not.
Yeah, and I'm using this term hypothesis, so hopefully we all remember it from, say, I don't know, grade 5, grade 6 science. Yeah. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I do. I remember. Maybe it was geography, or it was not geography. Maybe it was geology or something. I don't know. It was some kind of math class.
No.
I don't know.
It was a science class.
I guess it was. Yeah, right. I guess it was a science class, right? I don't
How
remember.
Can you define hypotheses for the listeners?
So I from what I remember in high school or whenever it was like that's what you start with. That's the very first thing. Like I have this kind of raw idea here. You haven't done any testing on it yet. It's a guess, kind of.
Exactly.
I think this is what is going to happen.
Right. So in science, you start with a hypothesis, which is an educated guess.
Right.
You have some information and you're forming a hypothesis, an educated guess about a certain aspect of the world. And as you mentioned testing, the idea is that those need to be tested against the real world. You test a hypothesis, you design experiments.
Right.
And so the lean startup methodology is very much that. It's almost trying to take the scientific method and apply it to business and product development. Mm-hmm. So you have a collection of hypotheses, which are these ideas, these guesses about the world. So you're guessing that there are customers out there that have a certain problem, for instance, and that you know how to solve that. That's all. Those are all guesses. And you build something, you design something quickly, put it out there.
For minimal expense.
Minimal expense and time, and measure the results, learn from those results, and then put it back into your original hypothesis or idea. Same as you would do in science.
But yeah, like learning on the job.
Well, I think a lot of people have had that experience where they've taken, say, a professional degree you did, and then you went and actually got a job, and you're like, oh, I just spent 4 years supposedly learn how to do this, and I didn't know anything.
Yeah, I was completely lost, and I learned everything on the job pretty much.
So the Lean Startup methodology is designed around rapid prototyping, so you quickly develop a prototype. Iterative product design, I mean, you design a product, you test that product, you take what you learn, and you make changes to the product, so that's iterating. And then data-driven decision-making. You're deciding how to move forward off of actual data rather than hypotheses or just guesses about the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember hearing you teach this class, and so I heard you use this term, but we didn't talk about it a lot. But the first time that I remember you suggested it for something we were doing was this podcast.
Right.
At the very beginning, I remember thinking about going about it totally differently than we actually did, which was like, okay, I think we should come up with all the topics we're going to do for at least the whole season, maybe 2 seasons, and record maybe the whole entire thing. Get all the right equipment and spend a whole bunch of time just getting this thing ready, basically. And you're like, well, actually, why don't we just buy one microphone and just record it straight into the computer and just see how it goes, see if we like it, see if we get any listeners. And then we start expanding.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. So in the Lean Startup, there's this idea of a minimal viable product. How can you produce a product for minimal cost and time and effort, put it out there, and test some of your hypotheses? Yeah, so you're right. So for this podcast, we had a number of hypotheses. The major 2, I guess. We had things to talk about that people would be interested in listening. Mm-hmm. And that we would enjoy this.
And that we would enjoy it, yeah.
That we'd be good at it all.
Right.
And before we made a big investment, money, time, effort, it would be good to test those hypotheses. And so that's what we did. We just bought one microphone and we put up the first 3 episodes. That's why the early episodes don't sound as good as the later episodes, because let's get it up, get it out there and see if this is something, one, that people respond to and that we enjoy doing, that we can see what's working.
And that we can do it.
Yes.
Can we hold these kind of conversations?
So those first 3 episodes were our minimum viable product. And, we just used free versions of podcasting platforms, et cetera, to put that together. So that's a little lesson in lean startup methodology.
Yeah.
And now we get to, well, how does this apply at all to relationships? Mm-hmm. And I think it not only applies, we now use it and we'll talk about how we use it, but I think it's maybe particularly useful for people who are in the situation that we just described, who have almost always had dysfunctional relationships and perhaps lacked knowledge about themselves and knowledge about relational patterns, so they're not sure how to move forward. And one thing we hear from some of those people, including some of our guests, is this fear or concern of going back into the relationship arena and just repeating all of these same patterns or distorted behaviors. And so sometimes people will withdraw and say, well, I need to work on myself.
Right. That's a very common thing I hear a lot from people, is just, well, okay, I failed. I've now failed 5, 6, 7, whatever times in relationships. I need to spend some time out of the relationship arena working on myself. So then my first question that pops in my head is like, are you, and how are you working on yourself? And how does that relate to relationships? Like, how you work on a relationship when you're not in a relationship?
So I think what could happen is use the lean startup methodology in order to start to go back into the relationship arena and to test out a number of the hypotheses you have about yourself, about relationships, about other people. Because we all have imperfect self-knowledge. Pretty much everything we know about ourselves is a hypothesis.
Yeah, true.
Some of those have been tested over and over again so that we have pretty high level of confidence in them. I mean, you can think of just the very basic ones. I know how tall I am. I know what shoe size I wear. Although even those can have changed somewhere.
That's true. But a lot of the things that people say they know about themselves or other people can very well change. And why does it have to be static? For one thing, the whole idea of codependency, right? I am codependent, so I know that about myself. Well, you can change that.
Yeah, and things change all the time, including things that we do have a high level of confidence in. Mm-hmm. I mean, I mentioned the height one. That's literally changed. I was very sure that I was 5'8", and then in my 40s I got measured. I was 5'9".
Wow.
And then I was 5'9" and 5'9" and 5'9", and I thought,
yeah, usually it's the opposite as you get older.
I know,
right?
usually the opposite. I'm sure at some point that will happen as well. But you can think of all kinds of things you think you know about yourself that, you discovered, actually, I do like to do X, or I don't like to do X. Or so our self-knowledge is made up of this collection of hypotheses, which we should be not treating as facts, all of us, and we should be constantly checking with ourselves and against the world and in relationship, whether those hypotheses are still holding up, or do we need to form a new one about ourselves. And so relationships are a great avenue for self-knowledge because they can push you to test your hypotheses about yourself. But you have to go in with that mindset. You have to go in with a mindset of, I'm doing this to learn, not say I'm doing this to perform. Yes,
right. Yeah, that's a huge distinction when I look at my history. When I started any kind of interaction with people, that's what it was. How is this person seeing me? What's my obligations? What are the expectations of me? Not so much what do I want? What do I expect? What am I looking for here? What kind of relationship do I want? It's just like, how's this going? Is in like, how am I being judged?
And am I performing well? Such that if you perform well, you feel like you have an obligation to continue. And if you don't perform well, you have an obligation to continue.
That was totally what happened to me. Right. Yeah.
In both of those ways. So what we're talking about here is treating a relationship as a kind of product and service that you're the customer for, as well as the other person.
Right.
And you want to test out whether that product or service, that relationship, will provide the value to the customer, that is you and the other person, that you need or wanted to, for the price. So we say that you're willing to pay.
Yeah, right.
Because there's a cost to being in every relationship in terms of your time and attention away from other people, for instance. So the idea is to try to be explicit about what your hypotheses are and to treat going into those relationship spaces as ways to test and to learn about yourself and the other person, and to go back in and redesign that product or service, which also could mean discontinuing.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. No, back to the drawing board with this one.
Yeah, that was wrong. With our basic hypothesis that this was a relationship that would be good for both of us is not. So in that respect, you're going to want to look for these MVP moments, these minimal viable product moments. And what's nice is that we have those MVPs set up for relationships, and they're called dating.
Right. I mean, I remember when I dated as a full-blown unconscious codependent person, it really wasn't dating. I was in a relationship immediately because this person is expressing interest in me. Oh, I'm performing correctly. Oh, they're displeased. I'm trying to satisfy that displeasure. I'm doing everything I can to make this work now because there's some kind of connection that I don't really understand, and I don't know exactly what I'm getting into or why. That was my codependent dating. And then, so yeah, I'm not really dating. I'm not going out with this person to see if I like them, and where was this going to go? I already know where this is going to go because
it's going to go wherever they say it's going to.
Yes, exactly where the other person says.
And we heard this say, remember from Jason, one of our guests, who says, like one good date, and he would feel he had to marry the person.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So what dating could be is this minimal viable product. You were spending, what you want to do is spend the least amount of your time and your effort and your money.
And your money, right? Yeah, sure.
To find out a number of hypotheses. One is, are you attracted to this person? Is this person attracted to you? Do you share some very basic values and interests that would make sense for you to continue? Do you have good conversations? Do you want the same thing out of a date? And then you can take what you learn from that, and you can move on to the next minimal viable product, which may be a second date.
Right, exactly, right. And maybe
not a marriage.
Right.
Again, because you still have more information to collect. And so what you're doing is you're iterating and you're developing this relationship, and hopefully both of you are doing that on your own and then coming together to do that, so that the other person is making those evaluations. And again, obviously, it's hard not to take that personally. It's hard for all of us not to go into performance mode. We want people to like us.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what we want for them is to figure out if we are a good fit as we are.
Yep.
So yeah, we don't want to go into these relational spaces. You performed, and these narcissists was like, oh yeah, I want him. He's performing well. But that has nothing to do with who you were as a person.
No.
So the product or service, the relationship that you ended up with was unhealthy and dysfunctional and in fact toxic to you. So we want people to choose us for who we are and because we fit together well in an authentic way in a relationship. So we have to bring our authentic selves, and we have to be okay with the fact that someone could choose that this was not the right relationship for them.
Yep.
And it could have nothing to do with us as a people. It just means that they want something different from the product or service that is a relationship.
Yeah,
right?
Even if you may think, like say I'm the one that thinks it went well, and there are the ones that decided that they didn't want to move forward.
Well, that's good information.
Yes, it's right.
For you, right? What the information is that person was not the right person to be in a relationship, yes, and right. You will find someone.
Well, and something that keeps popping in my head as we talk about this, which is something that I always used to leave out, and now I've heavily tried to loop into my life, which is reading my emotions. And when we're kind of laughing about this, using this minimal viable product, it sounds like it's okay. I'm analyzing data, but part of that data is your emotional reaction. So it could be that things look well on paper. Like you may have actually communicated with this person online first or something. You met them at a dating site and you lined up, like you answered all the same questions, but then you get together with them and you're like, something doesn't feel right here.
And that's the way you approach many aspects of your life, not just the dating aspect. So let's talk about that a bit as well, in terms of not just making relationship decisions, but life decisions.
Mm-hmm. Without emotion.
Without emotion. I'm thinking in particular, your decision that you wanted a music career.
Right. So first of all, it started from a codependent impulse. My friend really wanting to do it. This friend we talked about in the podcast before. And me going, okay, well, I want him to be happy because I want this friendship to work. I don't know that's exactly what I'm doing, but this is what I do every day. And I approached this thing as I did a lot of things, which is paralyze myself in research before testing it out at all. So there's no testing.
Yeah. So you had this hypothesis that you wanted to be a musician.
Yeah.
And you were pretty confident in that.
Yeah. We're like, we're going to make this work because it came from an emotional reaction. Initially, the two of us just sat around and improvised music on whatever we had, guitars or melodica and whatever. And then we're like, well, this, if it's that fun to do that, then maybe it'll be fun to make a whole career out of it.
That's a reasonable hypothesis.
It sounds like a pretty good hypothesis.
It's not unreasonable.
Yeah, except that's a big difference between sitting around and improvising music with no one listening but us and trying to make a career out of it where you're producing an album and putting out and playing live and all kinds of these things that we did not do.
So how did you pursue this?
Yeah, I pursued it by completely burying myself in research and not actually testing out anything at all. So it's just like, I'm going to read about the music industry. I'm going to read about how to put an album out, how to produce an album, how to perform live, like how do you get into clubs.
And you also spent thousands and thousands of dollars on musical equipment, and you set up a studio.
I rented a 3-bedroom apartment so that we had a whole bedroom for the studio. Bought all this, a vocal booth, a digital 24 track.
And you spent a year making an album?
Spent 2.5 years.
2.5 years making it. So there is an album out there. It's very good. You put it out yourselves.
Yeah. So
you created your own.
We created a record company. I came up with a fake name for myself so that I could be the whatever.
So that's great. You did produce, but you didn't even really kind of enjoy that. You didn't enjoy making the album.
It was very different process than just sitting around and improvising. So there already, I was not really enjoying it, but I was not reading the fact that I wasn't enjoying it. Mm-hmm. But also what I wasn't doing was we weren't performing at all. We weren't even performing to ourselves. So we weren't just like, can we play this song through? So like when we made these songs, it was like 10,000 takes and all pieced together into a song. It's like, wow. But then I couldn't actually play any of these songs. And
so this is kind of the equivalent of having this big business plan. You spend 2.5 years putting this business, and then you're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. We can't really.
I don't even know if we can.
And there's no kind of traction out there. It was a good album, but you can't just put it on an album and expect people. This was 20 years ago now or something. You can't,
it was a while
and
ago.
Expect people to know about. So what usually people do to get in the music business is they kind of do a lean startup methodology, or that's
what works.
Like buy a guitar, do a few songs, play in a local coffee shop or open mic, see if people respond to it. Build a TikTok following, right?
Like our podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is exactly why my impulse was kind of similar to, when you mentioned that idea, I was going back to my music. Oh, okay. Well, I need to start researching podcast business and things like that.
And then you have another example of how kind of making a life decision based on.
Yeah. So when I moved to a new city, from one city to another city, and I had certain types of things that I wanted to live near and do, and so I did this huge research project of where are all these things that I want to be able to do, and I want to be able to be within. I came with this arbitrary number, 0.3 miles so I can walk to all these things, and then graded them all, put a weighted scale on all of it. It took me months, like maybe 8 or 9 months to do this research, and then I picked a place, and then I basically picked an apartment within that place, all before going.
Before even seeing it.
Yeah, I didn't even see it. Not only did I not see the apartment, I didn't see the neighborhood. I didn't see anything.
So you signed up immediately for this apartment.
Yeah, I went there and went, yep, sure, good, sign me up.
Yeah, you didn't kind of do a gut check or anything.
No.
And then what happened?
And then it turns out, yes, it was near all these things, but that 0.3 mile radius around the building that I picked was awful, and I hated it. So every time I left the building, I was like, man, I really don't like being here.
Right. And, we see there's this connection of perfectionism and codependency. I think there's podcasts about it and books about, which makes sense. Again, if codependency comes from this sense of powerlessness, and perfectionism is this attempt to control. Kind of what you're trying to do is without really knowing about yourself, kind of glomming onto these external ways to make decisions.
Yeah, and I was completely leaving out emotion in that the only emotions I had in there were potential emotions. Like, I think I'm going to like being near these things.
Right. So you had all these hypotheses about yourself, but you didn't have very much self-knowledge, and you were not connected to your emotion. Mm-hmm. So again, people are struggling. Well, how do I know things about myself? Like, how do I learn about myself? You can test.
Yeah, just test it.
You can test. You can say, like, I think I'm going to like living near a brewery. Well, how can you approximate that experience without going all in and renting an apartment by the brewery, right? Like, so how often do you go to the brewery? Like, make a commitment to go to a brewery every week. Does that seem,
do you enjoy it?
Do you enjoy that? Or does that get old after a few weeks? And I mean, this is kind of classic when people sign up for, say, a gym.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's like, I'm going to go to the gym every month, so I'm going to buy a year-long annual membership, and then they go once or twice, and then like,
it becomes really annoying. It's annoying, the whole process. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
So, it's just kind of relationship decisions, other decisions. This is a great way to learn about yourself, is to try to design these little experiments. Like, what's a minimal viable product for this experience?
Yeah. And what I love about this is, you can fail, and you're probably going to fail more often because you're actually doing more tests. But then these are small failures. They're
great failures. They're learning. I mean, so it's not actually a failure because the test is a success.
Yes, exactly.
Because you've learned something about yourself.
Right. A failure is wasting all this time and not testing at all, and then going all in on it.
Right. So a failure is marrying someone who you could have known at the first date was not a good fit.
Yep.
You never put up hypotheses and experiments. And it's kind of, it's nice just to say experiment fact rather than a test, especially, if you have a codependent audience, because, I need to pass the test. No passing or failing the test. It's an experiment, and you take the results of those and you put it back into your self-knowledge and your hypotheses about the relationship.
And I feel like this is something we can be doing all the time, not even just at the beginning of things, to reassess things that we're doing. It's kind of like when I think about, like, why was I not playing guitar? Well, I actually didn't enjoy playing guitar all that much. I was judging myself for not doing it, but I wasn't looking at why I wasn't. I was just judging myself for it.
So we use this now all the time. Just that orientation towards, we think we know this. I think I know something about myself. You think you know something about yourself. We think we know something as a couple. How do we test this out? Yeah. So, for instance, we recently spent almost a year, living in an RV. But before we did that, we had a small travel trailer that we took out a lot. We learned a lot about that experience, about us, the two of us in that experience. And individually, we learned what we liked about that experience and didn't like that experience. So when we went to make the next step, we had a lot more confirmed hypotheses or confirmation for the hypotheses that the big hypothesis that we were going to enjoy this experience and was going to be worth the time and money and effort that we put into having it.
Rather than say neither one of us had ever owned a trailer, and I would spend a year researching trailers and RV parks and how it works and how do you work from the trailer and all these things, and then we just go out and buy it, and then we find out, oh man, this is really small, and I don't like being in the same room as this person all day.
I'm not cut out for driving and things like
whatever
that.
It is, yeah, right.
Almost kind of most of the decisions we make as a couple, we use that framework. We don't take it as a given. If I say, well, I really want this, and you say, I really want that. It's like, well, can we test? Those are things that we actually want before we make an investment, especially a co-investment in something. And this is for our relationship as well. We have certain relationship agreements, but those agreements are kind of just hypotheses. So, find ways to test those agreements. Make sure we don't have any untested assumptions.
Mm-hmm. Right. And have regular conversations or revisit topics, because things can change. These days, mostly, I think our MVP things that we do are logistical type things, like living situations and maybe even like household duties or things like that. Just so we have just regular conversations about our hypothesis about, is this still working? Is there another way to do this? Or
we're still iterating. all the time. The idea is that things change. People change individually, and then the relationship needs to iterate as well and to change. So just because, I do most of the cooking doesn't mean
You're always going to.
I'm always going to do most of the cooking. That's not a set feature of the relationship. The relationship is an iterative process. But yeah, I mean, kind of the MVP part, that's going to come in mostly at the beginning of relationships.
Startup.
As you start up, and it's an argument again for going slow, especially if you have kind of codependent habit. And and this is hard for everybody because the beginning can be a very exciting time. Even if it's with someone who is ultimately a good fit, it can be an exciting and also confusing time, and you can make kind of some bad decisions because you can rush into things that might get you into an unhealthy relationship, but also might compromise what would be a healthy relationship.
Right, yeah, what could otherwise be a really great relationship, yeah.
I mean, again, think of dating as everyone's little MVP. And that seems true. It's like, well, maybe it'd be a better idea to live together before you get married, or maybe better idea to have sex before you get married.
Before you move in together.
Or before you move in together.
Yeah, right.
Think about your relationship with Jay.
Yes, right.
I mean, you were living with her. You were financially supporting her.
Before we even had sex.
But
there were all kinds of other things, too, that say, oh, well, I guess because I moved fast, I was doing lean startup. No, because I was not actually learning anything. I didn't go into it like that. So instead, it's just like it's moving fast because I'm just doing everything that I think I'm supposed to do or I'm being asked to do, not because I want to do it and I feel it's right. I had all kinds of things tell me that this is off, but I'm not listening to any of that. So it's not a lean startup at all. Yeah, it's just a fast startup.
Yeah, fast isn't lean. I mean,
no, because I rented this super expensive house with her and stuff before we knew anything about each other.
The fast part of lean is that you learn things fast. Not how you most quickly get a product to market, is how quickly can you learn whether there is a market and whether there is a product there.
Right.
So it's the
and do
learning.
I want to do this?
Yes, it's the learning that you want to be fast, and you do that by taking any opportunity you have to learn about yourself, to learn about the other person, to learn about the relationship. One of the last episodes in season 4 was the you, me, us paradigm, and we'll be continuing to use that because we find it helpful.
Yeah, very much.
So you're learning about, those are 3 things you need to be learning about.
Yeah, right.
And you want to design situations and environments where both people can learn about all of those 3 things as much as possible with as little financial and emotional, etc. resources, because then there's less damage on the other side if one or both people decide they don't want to continue, for instance.
One of the things I love about the you, me, us, and why I keep wanting to use it for everything is that when I'm trying to think about this lean startup, I could be tempted to just use it on myself. Like, oh, okay, am I learning things about? But it's equally important that the other person is doing the same thing, and I actually have a part in that. I can help you, and you can help me learn these things.
Right, exactly.
And that's part of the intimate relationship.
And why, again, it's not a failure if you have a few dates and you decide, okay, this isn't working. That's a great success, right? That's, you both provided each other the opportunity to learn about each other, to learn about yourself, and to learn about a potential relationship and what you want from a relationship. And I mean, I know that's not the end game, that's not the end goal, but it's that gets you a lot closer to the end game than just going on dates and hoping people like you. And
right.
And if you find they do, okay, we're in a relationship now. That's going to take a lot more of your time, ultimately.
How am I performing here? Uh-oh, this person seems dissatisfied. What can I do to people please this person into liking me more?
Or this person likes me, so I'm
right. I need to double down on this then.
Or that's so exciting that to find someone that likes you don't even think about, well, even if you like them, can we build a relationship together?
So there's the S part, right? So
yes.
You may go, oh, I like myself. I like what I'm doing here. I like this person. I like what they're doing. Do we work together?
I mean, someone liking you, I don't want to undersell that. That's a great experience.
It is, for sure.
It's a terrific experience.
Yeah.
To find someone who likes you, and man, it's even exponentially better when you like them. But even at that point, you still got a lot of learning to do, which was the case for us. I mean, I fell for you hard, you fell for me, but we had a lot of learning to do as to whether we could make a relationship that was going to work for both of us. And that took iteration, and that took a commitment to learning and to asking the questions of each other and the world, forming these hypotheses and testing them out.
And that's a commitment that continues.
It does.
Because there's always something to learn. And there always will be something to learn.
So there you go. Listeners can let us know if we've closed that loop from the Lean Startup Method and its application to relationships. And welcome to the new season. Again, the book is available on Amazon.
Thank you for all the feedback we've been getting so far on the book and the continued feedback on the podcast. And of course, we would always appreciate any reviews on Amazon on the book if you feel compelled to do so.
It's very helpful. And we hope you'll join us in a couple of weeks.